The protest group Just Stop Oil want the government to commit to ending all new licenses for fossil fuel extraction. And they got attention for their cause like this.
Security!
What is worth more, art or life? Is it worth more than food? Worth more than justice? Are you more concerned about the protection of a painting or the protection of our planet and people? The cost of living crisis is part of the cost of oil crisis. Fuel is unaffordable to millions of cold, hungry families. They can't even afford to heat a tin of soup.
That was tomato soup being thrown on a Van Gogh painting, which was, we should say, covered in glass, so no damage was done. Apparently a little bit of damage was done to the picture frame, but that's obviously not as priceless as the picture. The stunt was part of Just Stop Oil's 14th day of action in Westminster, and the protests have been timed to coincide with a new round of oil and gas licenses being granted by the UK government. Aaron, this stunt has got lots of attention, created lots of discourse on social media. What's your take on the soupy attack on Van Gogh?
I thought it was baked beans, Michael, until I looked at the script for the show. Look, I find it strange, personally. However, it has garnered attention. You know, we posted this to our TikTok. I think it's got like 6.5 million views or something. So look, people are talking about it. We live in an attention economy, so getting people's attention is hugely useful if you want to achieve certain political objectives. The problem is, I think sometimes we all make the mistake of attracting the wrong kind of attention. Are you being an advocate for your cause? Are you impressing upon people a set of positive ideas about changing things? I feel like this isn't necessarily that. I don't think it was that bad. I'm not going to condemn it or something. I think the best example of that not working, of kind of really thoughtless, stupid direct action, was when you had two guys climb on top of a train. I think it was the Jubilee line, early hours, Extinction Rebellion, early hours of a weekday, people commuting to work. And actually, you're impacting thousands of people in terms of working class people, men and women, all backgrounds, students, whatever, just trying to get about their day, and you're stopping them. And that was really stupid and counterproductive. I don't think this is that bad, but I think, there is an important word in political activism, which is strategy, and it matters. I'm not saying this is wrong. I'm not going to be sitting here on YouTube condemning them and saying, oh, you're so unstrategic, because they got a lot of attention. But I do feel like we're in a phase now of direct action where sort of any kind of intervention any kind of attention grabbing is positive and to be welcomed. I don't think that's the case. I really don't think that's the case. I think direct action against fossil fuel companies, closing down circulation where you're affecting the 1%, creating cleavages in society where you're highlighting inequality, hugely powerful. One of the best examples of that, UK Cut, who were closing down businesses, high street businesses in the early 2010s, 2010, 2011, highlighting the fact that they weren't paying their tax. Hugely successful, very popular, educates the public at large. If you smash up the front door of BP or Shell, I'm not advocating that on YouTube. I'm just saying I can comprehend that. In this instance, I don't. Finally, this binary of art or heating people. I mean, that's not a binary. We can do both. You can conserve a Van Gogh painting and have affordable energy for everybody and socialized housing. We have had societies that have done that, by the way. So I thought it was a strange binary. Maybe you could say, well, the wealthy, they care about art. This grabs their attention. But actually, increasingly, you're finding art institutions not having a commercial relationship with fossil fuel companies. Fantastic. So it wasn't to highlight that either, because I think in this instance of this institution that there wasn't that relationship. So I don't really get it. But we're talking about it on YouTube. Millions of people have watched it today. So maybe I'm wrong, Michael. I'm always open to that possibility. What do you think?
I mean, I don't have a particularly certain view on this one, but I think I am actually quite sympathetic to it. And the reason I say that is because we often talk when it comes to activism that you respect people who have made a sacrifice towards their cause. you know. And we often talk about that when it comes to sort of like going to prison or spending 24 hours in a jail cell or losing a day's pay from work, you know, if people are going on strike. And I do think that here a real sacrifice was made, which is that these two young women were willing to have the whole country think they're idiots, right? And I'm being serious here. I'm being completely sincere. I'm impressed by that. And the reason I am impressed by that is because I do think it doesn't matter if the public like your action. What matters is if the public care about or are interested in your cause. And what I've always found quite impressive about Extinction Rebellion and Insulate Britain and all these things where, you know, I can see how it's pissing off a lot of people. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't feel comfortable doing it myself personally because I'd feel a bit awkward about stopping people going about their business or whatever. But the thing, and they didn't do that here, by the way. I feel people thinking the painting is crossing the line, whereas stopping people getting to work wasn't crossing the line. I find that quite bizarre. This to me seems less disruptive of ordinary people. If there wasn't a bit of glass in front of the painting, it would be a different story, but there was, which to me means it's just, you know, it's not a particularly offensive action at all. But going back to my key point, what I find impressive about Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil and all of these is the number of people who say, of course I'm in favour of their ends, but just not the means they try and achieve it. And actually that is a real shift from, say, 4 years ago. You know, of course we shouldn't be drilling for new oil fields, but I wouldn't go about it like that. If you've got people saying that, you're winning, right? So if you've got people on talk radio, they're all calling in saying, oh, of course, I think their ends are valid, but I don't care about their means. Well, great. That's exactly what you want them to be saying. Because as a campaigner, you don't care. You shouldn't care if people like you. You should care if people are, I mean, obviously, you're not going to get convinced by that, but you might get convinced by the conversation which is prompted by that. And so I do have a fair amount of respect for it. And to be honest, I feel less uncomplicated about this throwing of the soup on the Van Gogh than I do about, you know, stopping the roads and stopping people getting to work, because, you know, that is really disrupting the lives of ordinary people going to work, etc., people picking up their kids. I think that's much more morally complicated than this, which is why I find it a bit bizarre that this is the one where so many people on social media have been saying, oh, the line has really been crossed now. I think Andrew Marr tweeted, now they have lost me. You know, as in sort of like, I used to be sympathetic to these climate activists, but now they have thrown soup on a Van Gogh painting, which was covered in glass anyway. Now they have lost me. Now I'm going to go buy an oil car instead of converting to an electric one. I find it a little bit overblown. And this is the other thing people have been, I suppose, going to your BP and Shell thing of sort of hammering the BP and hammering the Shell. There are lots of actions which make more sense. You know, you don't have to explain why they would have smashed the BP or smashed the Shell. But I think that would have been talked about much less. The reason actions like this get a lot of airtime on LBC, get a lot of airtime on talk radio, get a lot of airtime on BBC, is because it's an interesting debate. Oh, this was is this wrong? Is this right? You can sort of debate something which people understand, which is the wrongness or the rightness of throwing soup on a painting. And even if only 10% of the time is taken up by someone talking about oil, that's more than you would have had someone talking about oil and climate change than if the soup had not been thrown on the paint. I think I could be persuaded otherwise, especially, you know, if there's some data involved. But I think as it stands, I am pro the soup Van Gogh action, given that there was glass in front of it. Aaron.
I mean, look, Michael, I read some comments saying, authoritarian Aaron Bastani. What about the poll tax? I support the poll tax riots. It was very effective. The point is the poll tax riots were part of a much wider movement of non-payment, people going to prison. I think it's kind of flippant and frivolous to compare that to this action, which, by the way, may work. We agree there. I'm not saying it's wrong, I condemn it. I'm not saying that in the slightest. But what I do worry about is that people now think that activism is purely about attention. And I think the most impressive part of that action for me was actually what the young woman said. Very lucid, very persuasive. And I feel like if you're trying to build a mass movement of activism, direct action, like the poll tax, by the way, then you do need, or you can cut, another example, or strike action. You do need forms of protest and dissent which can bring millions of people in. For instance, you know, school strikes for climate action, I think was a great example of that. So I'm not suggesting this is bad. I'm not suggesting it's detrimental. I'm not condemning them, but I do worry there's a tendency, there's a turn to viewing this kind of activism as somehow, you know, the highest form of activism. No, persuasion is hugely, hugely important. And this fixation with spectacle hasn't really done much in the 21st century, right? We've seen it for a long time, hasn't done much. I could be wrong. I hope I am.